In 1959, the CIA is confronting a new enemy, Fidel Castro, the man who threatens to spread communism across America's backyard.
The fear for the United States was that a Cuban-style revolution would explode throughout Latin America.
The US President Dwight Eisenhower wants him assassinated, and the CIA is given a job. But they need someone who can break through his tight security. Their unlikely weapon, a 19-year-old woman named Marita Lorenz.
She was the natural choice because she could get through all of the protective layers that Fidel had around him, and she could get into his bed.
This is the story of one of the most extraordinary CIA operations of them all. It will involve the Mafia, a Watergate burglar, and Castro's lover.
He looked at me. Did you come to kill me?
This, the most bizarre CIA assassination attempt of them all, begins with a chance encounter that took place in the port of Cuba's capital city, Havana. A 19-year-old German-American woman named Marita Lorenz is on the deck of her father's cruise liner, the MS Berlin.
I was on board the ship. My father was sleeping. I saw this launch coming, and it was coming closer and closer. And then finally, they stood up and waved. And I saw that they all had guns and all wore green uniforms and had beards. The launch came up very close, and he just held on to the railing. He looked up, and I looked down. He said, "I'm coming up." And I said, "No." And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, who are you?" And he just looked at me, and he said, "This is Comandante Fidel Castro."
Fidel Castro is the most notorious revolutionary in the world. Just 1 month earlier, at the age of 32, he seizes power in Cuba in January 1959. He overthrows an American-backed dictator and turns his people against the United States. Castro becomes Prime Minister of Cuba and forms a close economic and military alliance with the Soviet Union. Now his friendship with the Soviets and his desire to spread his communist revolution throughout Latin America is sending shockwaves back to the United States.
We didn't realize there was a threat right in the United States backyard until it was too late and Castro had seized power. We had to focus our attention because this had the potential to become a communist base in our hemisphere.
Cuba is only 90 miles away from the American coast.
Cuba was so close to the United States and was potentially a place where missiles could be launched directly against the United States. I mean, what a strategic advantage Fidel had.
Eisenhower recognizes that Castro is a serious emerging threat to the US that needs to be dealt with. But the young Marita knows nothing about this man who's about to come on board her father's ship.
Very flirtatious, looking at my eyes, trying to size me up.
As they come together, 19-year-old Marita Lorenz is swept away by Castro's charisma.
And I I saw his eyes, and that was it. Lost in love. I fell in love. And that's the first time I kissed him. And then my father stormed in. And that's that picture of me sitting at the table with the first officer and Fidel, and immediately I pulled my hand away so Papa wouldn't see.
Marita's father invites Castro to stay for dinner that evening before he takes his ship and his daughter back to New York.
I remember standing on the top deck when we pulled out of the harbor and missing him and feeling terrible. I've got to see him again.
As soon as Marita returns to the city, Fidel Castro calls and invites her back to Cuba. This is the beginning of a passionate love affair.
I hadn't even unpacked. He said, "How are you? I miss you." And with his bad English, asked me to come back. I send you airplane. And I ended up back in Havana with the same suitcase I hadn't unpacked.
A week later, Marita leaves her family's ship and moves into Castro's penthouse apartments on the 24th floor of the Havana Hilton.
I felt absolutely terrified, happy, frustrated, crazy, and defying my parents without telling them. I felt very guilty. I was taken to a suite, 2408, which linked to 2406 with doors. The first thing I remember, the smell of cigars. This is his place. I look around and there's all his uniforms and this beautiful music. It was a record that never stopped. It played over and over and over again. And boots turned upside down and ashtrays with cigars in it. And then I see toys. Little tanks. And then a bazooka sticking out from under the bed. This was where Fidel was living, and that kind of scared me a little bit, but I don't have anywhere to go. Even if I tried, the whole hall was filled with bodyguards, and it was Fidel's suite. And they just said, wait, and don't go out, just wait. And I did just that. I waited and waited and waited. All of a sudden, I hear the door swing open. And he came in and picked me up and swung me around. And I miss you so much, and love talk. And that's a moment I'll never forget.
The CIA has been looking for ways of getting to Castro, and they've just stumbled on their first big break.
He would have very close access to Fidel. Fidel, I'm sure, had very, very tight security. He would have bodyguards with him, protective detail wherever he went.
Oh, Fidel Castro, from the very beginning, enjoyed very, very good personal security. Very good. It's comparable to the best anywhere in the world. He created one of the world's best intelligence and counterintelligence organizations.
Back in Washington, CIA agents realize that 19-year-old Marita Lorenz may be exactly what they are looking for.
Here you have one of the prime targets by the U.S. government and the CIA, Fidel Castro himself. So anybody that's accompanying him, around him, or anywhere connected with him is going to be known in detail by U.S. intelligence.
The CIA realizes Marita could be a valuable asset, and they are studying her every move.
Marita had a romantic relationship with him. A romantic relationship would actually get her into his bedroom, so she would be able to bypass all of his security layers. She would be the ultimate recruitment target for the CIA and for the US government. No one could track him down except for this one person who was his lover.
In April 1959, Fidel Castro is invited to the US by the Society of Newspaper Editors. Castro accepts the invitation, hoping to win over American public opinion as tensions between the two countries steadily rise. Marita accompanies him on their 11-day visit. The CIA is, of course, there too.
What the CIA would use is what's called the foreign agent recruitment cycle. And that cycle consists of first spotting a target, a person that has direct access to the person that you're after. The spotting could have very possibly occurred when Marita was either in Havana, or be a strong possibility it could occur when she traveled to the United States with Fidel and he met with Nixon.
He came to New York in anticipation of seeing President Eisenhower. And instead, Eisenhower rejected him and pushed him off to Nixon, which absolutely infuriated Fidel. He felt very angry that he wasn't accepted with open arms as the new leader of Cuba.
That would have been a prime opportunity for her to be spotted. Without question, he was meeting with Nixon. That was a high-level meeting, and you can be sure that U.S. intelligence was all over that visit. Then they would assess the person, their vulnerabilities, whether they were available for recruitment. Then they would develop that person, befriend them, find certain switches maybe that they could use. And then finally they'd make the pitch, would you come over and work with us and can we use you in our operation?
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
After 2 blissful months, Marita learns that she is pregnant with Castro's child.
I was happy to be pregnant, very happy. I wanted it. I wondered what it was going to be. He said, oh, wonderful. Half German, half Cuban. I said, and American. And he was very happy. He said, now I have to build another hospital.
But Marita realizes there are limitations to being Fidel Castro's lover.
I understood that he belonged to Cuba. He made that very clear. He belonged to everybody and to Cuba first, and to nobody but to Cuba.
By now, the US is becoming increasingly concerned by Castro's popularity.
Fidel Castro was a titanic figure. When he won power on New Year's Day in 1959, he had come down from the mountains of Cuba after a 2-year insurgency. He was the hero of the Cuban population. He was a young man, he was 32 years old, and there was an appeal, the beard and the costume that he cultivated very, very carefully, almost never being seen out of that guerrilla costume. He was admired in much of Latin America, especially among the youth, the university students, the nationalists, and of course the radical left. It was just weeks after he won power, and Fidel began very stridently attacking the United States in speeches. He did this in speech after speech. He denounced the United States.
If the Americans don't like what is happening in Cuba, they can land the Marines and then there will be 200,000 gringos dead. Even if the Yankee imperialists prepare a bloody drama for America, they will not succeed in crushing the people's struggles. They will only arouse universal hatred against themselves. and such a drama will also mark the death of their greedy and carnivorous system. It is the end of 1959, and US-Cuban relations are deteriorating rapidly.
It looked pretty clear now that Fidel was abandoning any pretense of democracy, of fair government, of human rights. He began to support violent incursions, interventions against other Latin American leaders. He was aggressively exporting the Cuban Revolution to other countries. And the thinking in Washington was becoming much more focused on, we've got to do something about this.
It is now that the US government realizes that Castro must be removed.
The CIA were highly regarded in Washington in those days, and the belief was that covert action against Castro was the best instrument to use.
What happens next is a bizarre and strange mystery, but one that eventually leads to Marita being put in contact with the CIA. Marita is alone in Castro's penthouse apartments in the Havana Hilton. The birth of their child is predicted for the beginning of December, and Marita has just ordered her room service breakfast.
Everything was fine. Getting big, getting ready for the baby. I had ordered breakfast, and I drank the milk. I felt dizzy. I said, well, maybe this is just because of the pregnancy. But no. All I remember was falling backwards on the bed, and I was out. And then I woke up in a car, and I was being driven somewhere. I was like half asleep, and then I was out.
Marita's memory of what happens next is very hazy. She has glimpses of events that she can only partially recall.
The next thing I remember is lights, a light above me, and arguing back and forth, cursing in Spanish. They were arguing about Fidel. I don't know if they're arguing at him or with him or against him or for him or what. I couldn't make it out. And I don't know if my clothes were on or off, or somebody's moving my body back and forth.
Marita is 7.5 months pregnant and senses that something shocking is happening to her baby.
Terrible pain, terrible pain. But I was like half gone. I thought the baby was born. For a moment, I heard a baby cry. I had a needle in my arm, and the pain was unbearable. And I felt wet. It made me frightened, and I started to cry. And that's all I remember. And then I woke up back in my suite.
Marita is so ill, one of Castro's aides arranges for her to fly back to New York for urgent medical treatment. FBI agents are there as her plane touches down.
The FBI met me at the airport, and I went straight to Roosevelt Hospital under FBI protection, surrounded by them.
Unbeknown to Marita, this is the beginning of her involvement with the CIA plot to kill Castro. After a forced abortion, performed when she was drugged and kidnapped from Castro's residence, Marita is now suffering from blood poisoning and requires immediate surgery. And she's about to find out what has really happened to her.
It is apparent that she underwent a forced abortion in Havana. And then the question would be, was that done by the Cuban government? Was that done by the US government or the CIA? And based on my knowledge of the kind of operations that happened back then, personally, I don't think the CIA would have done that. It would be my opinion, perhaps, that Castro himself may have been behind that. He had several lovers, and it's very possible that Marita was not the only one. And if a child was born, it could have caused him possibly some political ramifications.
The CIA agents begin to use the abortion as a way to turn her against Castro.
If Castro was behind this forced abortion, then that would be the ultimate development tool to use with Marita, because that would be a classic betrayal, not just by her romantic lover, but also the loss of her child caused by Fidel Castro.
The CIA now initiates its plan to turn Marita into their assassin.
The next step in the recruitment cycle is called development. And at that point, they would approach Marita and begin developing her.
First, the CIA agents play the good cop and try to win her confidence.
After the hospital stay, I was allowed to go home under 24-hour guard and recover physically and mentally and emotionally. Had the agents around me every day giving me so-called vitamins. And they took turns watching me day and night and day and night.
The agency would now know the vulnerabilities that Marita had after the assessment, and to develop her, they would begin appealing to those vulnerabilities.
I was heartbroken. I was sad. I was lonely.
She was betrayed. She had an abortion, a child that obviously she loved and wanted to keep. She was emotionally traumatized. She wound up in a US hospital alone. So they'd begin appealing to that.
They started this program of, let's get even with him. He did this to you. Let's get even with him.
He didn't do anything about it, left her in the cold. So he wasn't the person that she thought he was.
I was 19. I was very naive when it came to matters of politics or international foreign policy affairs or love affairs.
They're going to try to convince her that the United States is the good guy and Fidel Castro is the bad guy.
They repeated things over and over and over again about Fidel doing this, Fidel that, Fidel this. I would have these crying jags where I would curl up into a ball and cry my eyes out and wanting the baby and throwing things, and they would give me pills to calm me down. They would say that's the anger coming out and you have to do something to get rid of that anger,
Before the CIA agents can go any further with Marita, they need to know that she has been telling them the truth about her past.
The next very important step is you have to vet the person, the target. It's critically important because we've had many times, many cases where a person has come over and they've become a double agent or were a double agent. So to vet, in this case, Marita, the agency would have to corroborate all the information she provided. Her trips back to Havana, all her records would be checked, her travel records, the people that knew her over there, if we had access to them, and the procedure would not proceed forward until the agency was absolutely convinced that the information she was providing was credible.
Having worked on her personal relationship with Castro, planting the seed that he is the bad guy, they now need to get her on their side politically. The CIA agents begin to dig deeper into Marita's past. Marita tells them she was born in Germany on the 18th of August 1939. And 2 weeks later, her country invaded Poland.
I'm a child of the war. All I remember is hard times.
The agents learn that her father, Heinrich, was a German submarine captain. Marita informs them that her mother, Alice, was a spy for both the French resistance and the British intelligence during World War II.
My first memories of her were in the basement where she would do Morse code, da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
She tells them that in 1944 her mother's cover was blown and that she was thrown into the Nazi German Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Marita, then only 5 years old, accompanied her there.
I was incarcerated in an SS home and then transferred to Belsen.
At the end of the war in 1945, the Belsen concentration camp was liberated, and Marita says she was finally rescued.
It was this British ambulance driver that found me half dead under a bunk in Belsen and pulled me out.
In 1950, the family moves to the United States, settling eventually in New York, and life begins to improve for Marita. The story of Marita's brutal childhood in Germany allows the CIA agents to play on her loyalty to her new country, the country that's made her happy, and the country that Castro is now threatening to destroy. Planting the seed that Castro is the bad guy in their relationship, they now broaden their approach to include his hatred of America.
They'd bring out the information such as Castro was determined on invading the United States, overturning the U.S. government. He was a bad guy. He was affiliated with the Russians. He hadn't told her any of that information. She didn't know any of that.
You didn't know that? No, you're too dumb, too blind, you know? They would curse at me. They would keep me in the room. They wouldn't open the window. I wouldn't go out. They would just bring food, and I felt confined. And all they ever talked about, look, here's more proof. See, he's a commie. He's nothing but a damn commie. And you have to do something.
Having now softened Marita up, the agents come clean and ask her to join them.
The final step in the recruitment process would be the pitch. And that's when you actually ask the person to come over and work for the CIA, U.S. intelligence, and ultimately the U.S. government.
The CIA said to me, now you can work for us.
After weeks of developing Marita, she agrees to join them. Only now do the CIA agents finally disclose the real purpose of their mission.
We want you to take him out. And I said, you what? You trying to tell me to kill him? And they said, well, we don't use those words. It's just kind of neutralizing him. Look, can you just put something in his food and put him to sleep? You would never know, and you would leave. I said, I can't kill him.
The CIA now ramp up the horror of a world under Castro's control and try to explain to Marita that the future of the United States is at stake.
They would have to have her so convinced that Castro had absolutely betrayed her, that his sole aim was to invade the United States and overturn the U.S. government, that the lives of millions of American people were at stake, that the U.S. Constitution was at stake, and possibly a nuclear war was at stake. And she was one of the only ones that could stop that.
And I started to believe them. You're going to be a good citizen, and I wanted to be good. I didn't want to be bad.
You have to do this. You have to do this not just for you and your freedom, but for the United States and the people in the United States.
90 miles away, you know, that's how close he is. You could almost walk there. You could jump a puddle, you know. That's how close he is. Just think of it, Marita. You will save this country from the evils of communism. And how proud my mother would be, and how proud we would be. And I would have a star in the CIA building in Langley.
Eventually, it seems the CIA tactics have worked.
They slowly convinced me, and I said, well, maybe they weren't all that wrong. Fidel's unpredictable. You could push that button. If I went ahead and just slipped him something to go to sleep, I would prevent an invasion. And then I thought, I have to go back and kill him.
Towards the end of December 1959, the CIA needs to be sure that she's a willing agent, so they send her back to Cuba. Marita enters the country as an American tourist, but her real task is to gauge how Castro will react to seeing his lover after 6 weeks recuperating in New York.
They wanted me to not be absent too long from Fidel. They didn't want him to think that I had become a turncoat and working for them now.
If Marita was sent by the agency back to Havana, that would be a vetting process. Obviously, if she was a double agent or if she had provided false information and went back to Havana, she would stay there.
I had the keys to the suite, room 2408, and I could just walk in and walk out. And the toys are still there, the music is still there, the boots are still there, his clothes are still in the closet.
So if she went there and she behaved the way that her handlers in the U.S. had told her to do, did the things that they told her to do, and then if she came back, then that would be a very, very good indication that she was indeed now properly assessed and recruited.
Marita passes the test. The CIA now prepares the assassination plan. At the beginning of January 1960, the CIA instructs Marita to travel to Miami to meet a man called Frank Sturgis. A former US Marine, Sturgis fights alongside Fidel Castro in the 1950s and becomes his chief of Air Force intelligence. But when Sturgis realizes the direction Castro's revolution is heading, he changes sides, and now he's working for the CIA.
Some people in the press call him a real-life James Bond, and he certainly was. He used over 30 different aliases in his career as a spy and as an assassin. I lived with Frank for a year in Miami when I was in college. He had a whole drawer full of phony IDs. I mean, some of them were from South American countries. I mean, the man was clearly, he was a man of action. He didn't just sit around and talk about his beliefs. He firmly and deeply believed in the freedoms that we have here in the United States and didn't like communism. He didn't like the total control of the individual's life and took a stand against those things and basically waged a war against Fidel Castro. When Marita Lorenz met with Frank Sturgis in January of 1960 to proceed with this plot to assassinate Fidel Castro, Frank at that point was working hand in hand with the CIA in an attempt to overthrow the Fidel Castro government. He told me that Marita was a very intelligent, beautiful, secure 19, 20-year-old woman. He was very impressed with her and in terms of her maturity for her young age. She basically was thrust onto a kind of a world stage in terms of the relationship she had with Fidel.
Sturgis's job is to come up with a suitable murder weapon for Marita to use against Castro. Should it be a gun? A knife? Eventually, he decides on poison pills. To get hold of the poison, Sturgis turns to an unlikely source to obtain it.
When Frank Sturgis told me the story, I said, poison, where do you come up with poison, Frank? And he looked at me and said, well, I got him from some friends. And I said, friends? He said, let's just say close family of friends. And of course, I knew he was talking about the Mafia.
The thought that the CIA working with the Mafia is not such a far-fetched idea. The mob had controlled much of Cuba's gambling interests for 50 years. But when Castro came to power, he kicked them out. The mob knows that if Castro is taken out, they can move back in.
The Mafia and the CIA had a community of interest in terms of getting rid of Fidel. And so I think all those things kind of gelled together in this particular plot.
It is clear, and there is documented evidence, that between 1960 and 1965, the CIA did approach the Mafia to obtain the poison pills to use against, specifically, Castro. The reason that they would do that, obviously, is the Mafia could get these poisons illegally, which the United States could not do, or even the CIA officers would prefer not to do.
Sturgis gives Marita the pills containing botulism toxin. The weapon is very carefully chosen. They are not traceable. They would dissolve completely and invisibly in liquid. There will be no odor or taste. Critically, they will be easy to use for someone emotionally involved, because the death will not be unpleasant.
They would portray to her that, look, this is a very easy way to go. You're not going to be pulling the trigger on a gun. There's no violence in this, and it's a merciful way to do it, to use poison. Really, this is the most painless, soft way to do it. Castro won't suffer at all.
The CIA has got their agent and their murder weapon. All that is left now is to set their assassin in motion. The problem now facing the CIA is that Castro has no routine, no set pattern, which drives the agents wild with frustration. He is in Havana one minute, then across the other side of the island the next. Even his closest associates have little idea where he will be spending the night.
He had no hours, he had no timing. Nobody could make an appointment with him. He was always 6 or 8 hours late. His watches meant nothing. He would come and go as he pleased and he wished. Nobody ever knew what he was going to do.
He was a pretty hard target, so they would have to find out a routine, a habit, something that would occur pretty regularly so they could have things set up to occur at that time or that place.
Eventually, CIA agents spot a pattern. Castro gives regular public television broadcasts to tell his people how they are all benefiting from the revolution. The CIA agents discover that whenever he is going to make a live television speech, he stays at his penthouse in the Havana Hilton. Just after New Year, the CIA sends Marita back to Havana to assassinate Castro. She is told they have intelligence that he will be at the penthouse that night.
This was one of the most tense times in U.S. history in terms of intelligence and military involvement in the Cold War, our relations with Russia and their connection to Cuba. So this operation would have been of utmost importance to the CIA and to the U.S. government.
I was in the plane. I was going to go to kill Fidel, you know. The pills made me nervous.
Marita, terrified she will be stopped going through customs, decides on an extra precaution to try and conceal the poison pills.
I went into the bathroom and I put them in a cold cream jar. And I felt better. I felt I'd be okay going through customs.
The 90-mile trip from Miami to Havana takes about 30 minutes. Marita makes it through customs unchecked. It seems her trick with the cold cream has worked. Marita now heads to the Havana Hilton and Fidel Castro's penthouse suite.
I felt important. I almost felt like I was in a grasp that I couldn't get out of, and that I was going to be saving American lives if I took this one life. I walked right in and snuck in the bathroom, closed the door, hoping Fidel didn't walk in right now. I was nervous because I have this man's life in my hands, all because of these little tiny pills. My heart was crying. Oh God, I was absolutely scared.
Marita's mission is to place the poison pills in Castro's drink to assassinate him. But they are covered in cold cream, which is sticking to the pills like glue.
I tried to wipe the cold cream off the pills. Oh. I was panicking. My God. There was no way I could grasp the pills.
Marita now desperately tries to abort the mission.
And I just took them like that and they wouldn't go down, and they kept floating. I was panicking. I thought I heard the door, and Fidel was coming in. I kept pushing the lever down, and one went down, and the other one didn't. And I smelled like cold cream, and Fidel walks in. I said, Fidel, I love you, I'm back. I'm gonna stay, this and that, you know. He lay down on the bed like nothing. He said, you're back. What you been up to, hanging around those Miami people? And when he said that, oh my God, he knows. He knows. And he just looked at me and shook his head. And then he just took off the gun belt and threw it over the lamp. And he took the gun out of the holster. I thought that he's gonna shoot me. But then he flipped it around and he gave it to me. He looked at me and he said, did you come to kill me? He left himself wide open, vulnerable. He turned to his side, you know, like she's got the gun in her hand, what is she gonna do? Who is she really? He was, for a split second, a little nervous. And then he just took a puff of smoke on a cigar and closed his eyes. He said, nobody can kill me. Nunca. Nobody ever can kill me. I ejected the magazine out of the gun, and then I put the gun back in the holster, and then he said, come here. And that was the end of that. I could have killed him, but I didn't kill him. I went to bed with him. He took the phone off the hook. I was so relieved about the pills. I was even afraid that my makeup case would come walking out of the bathroom. But I made love to him. And it was as beautiful as ever, but something was missing. And that was the baby.
On the same evening, Marita flies back to Miami and tells the CIA she has failed to kill Castro.
Frank felt that Marita lost her nerve on this particular assignment, mainly because of her feelings about Fidel. The old emotions, if you will, took over, and she just wasn't willing to take the step to actually to end his life.
You know, the CIA is not always successful in what it does, and it has failed a number of times. We never know about that because it's an enclosed, secret world. So failure is something that the CIA is used to. So if Marita was not successful in her operation, the agency would just move on to the next plan. That's exactly what they did.
Marita's failure causes the CIA to realize they will need to continue exploring ways to get to Castro. Marita's was the first assassination attempt on Castro's life, and is the closest anyone has managed to get to him. Since then, there's been an estimated 638 plots to kill Castro, ranging from an all-out invasion to exploding cigars, poison pens, and sniper attacks. All have failed, and Castro, who steps down in 2008 as one of the longest-serving heads of state in the world, is still alive today.
He's survived quite a few assassination attempts. Only a few of them were sponsored by the American government. Many others were sponsored by Cuban exiles who were violently opposed to the Castro government. Fidel survived because he created a very powerful and thoroughly ruthless machine for internal security. He was absolutely ruthless. Whenever he even had a scent of opposition, whether it was a group of Cubans somewhere on the island or some prominent individual in the Cuban leadership, even a hint of opposition was enough to result in that person's political extermination and possibly even their execution.
The year after Frank Sturgis gave Marita the poison pills, he helped plan the CIA-funded Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba to overthrow the Castro government. He was later arrested as one of the Watergate burglars, sent by President Richard Nixon to break into the Democratic National Headquarters in Washington. Sturgis was imprisoned for 13 months. As for Marita, she continued to work against the Castro government, and during a fundraising mission met another dictator, former president of Venezuela, Marcos Pérez Jiménez. Marita fell in love with Pérez. They had a daughter and a brief affair, and then he was imprisoned on charges of embezzling $200 million. In 2000, Marita returned to Havana in the hope of meeting with Fidel Castro again, but he refused to see her. Today, she is still living in New York.